Well, Tyler, it looks like this is the end.
Yeah. We've reached the end of book the 13th. Well, I
Hmm.
mean, not really. There's, chapter 14, which I guess is its own book.
So you mean the end isn't the end?
Well, I mean, we do still have that chapter 14, and then there is also the Jim Carrey movie, which we might talk about.
Okay.
And
All right.
and then there's also the Netflix series.
Okay. And that's how many seasons?
Three seasons. Yeah.
All
Uh,
right.
do you do you think you can make it through all that?
Well, as my second favorite train says, I think I can. I think I can. I think I can. I don't want to. I think I can. Yeah. Hello and welcome to Woeful Wednesdays. Nathan reads a series of unfortunate events. Ignore the tattoo. My name is Nathan.
And I'm Tyler.
If you are new to this, then you are at the very end of the series.
Yes.
So this is kind of a weird time to jump in. But if this is your first time watching the video, then I would encourage you to go back to the very beginning of this series. If you look on my channel, if you go to playlist, you're going to have a series of unfortunate events as a playlist. And then I would suggest that you just start from the very beginning, because we've been reading through the entire series, starting with book the first and going all the way up to book the 13th, the end. And we are specifically looking at chapters 9 to 13 today. We do have one more podcast with the book series where it's going to be book 14, which is the last chapter in this. Or a separate book, but it's not published separately. I don't know what to call this.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get into that with the next discussion because it is a bit curious there. But
Right, because I have not read this before. So Tyler has read the series before. This is my first time reading it, and we have been doing 3 videos for each book. But then this one has kind of put a little bit of a wrinkle in that plan. So we're now doing 4 videos for this book, but it's going to be a 4th discussion plus a wrap up of the entire series, which we'll have posted next week. So. Yeah, I think that basically covers it. It's a little bit different for the introduction, but like I say, we're basically at the end of the series. And I should probably mention that, as you were mentioning at the very beginning there, that we are going to do our plan right now is to continue on with Woeful Wednesdays, and at least for a fair bit longer, but now looking at the adaptation. So looking at the Jim Carrey film from 2004, I want to say.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so we're going to watch that. We'll do a full discussion of that film, and then we're going to go through the Netflix series, and basically we're going to post a video for each book in the television series that it covers, the bad beginning, and then the reptile room, the wide window, that those will be separate videos. And so that will end up being 13 videos.
Yep, 13 videos for the Netflix series, one for the Jim Carrey film, as well as one for the wrap-up and chapter 14. So
Right.
We've got 15 videos left.
Yeah, so it's the end, except not at all. There's going to be 15 more weeks of this.
Yep.
So if you're like, oh, good, I made it to the end, it's no, you didn't, and neither did we.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
I understand that we have a sponsor for this week's episode.
Yeah, we do. What's going to power us through all of this, all of the watching and the talking and all of that, is one of the best snack items that you can find: horse-rapples. Horseradish apples, this lovely hybrid that the Baudelaire parents have invented. Horse-rapples feature all the sharp zest of horseradish with the tart apple flavor that you love. None of the nutritional benefits of either one, but all of the bad flavoring of both.
Yes,
Yeah. So it horse-rapples, the perfect snack to postpone death. If you ever encounter Medusoid mycelium and you want to just postpone death just even a few hours, then turn to the experts at Horse-rapples.
Absolutely. Man, I am so thankful that they sponsored this episode. I don't know if you've ever tried a horse-rapple, but I hear that the first bite is the absolute sweetest that you will ever experience, and then it goes downhill from there.
Right. Yeah, but isn't that usually because the first bite tastes so sweet because your entire mouth is filling up with a mushroom, like a
Yeah, I think
poisonous
so.
fungus that's taking
Yeah.
over? So, in comparison, this thing is delicious. And then
Absolutely.
as the fungus recedes, then it becomes less and less delicious.
What a great product.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. Go out and get a bushel of horse rapples today. All right, folks, I hope you enjoy. Ignore the tattoo! Nathan unfortunately reads a series of unfortunate events at an unfortunate age, which in this case is being used to indicate that he is entirely too old to be reading this for the first time. All right, so we are looking at Book the 13th, The End, chapters 9 to 13. Again, the penultimate discussion of the book series, even though the penultimate peril was a whole book ago, but
Yeah.
I don't, any book the 14th is coming up, or chapter 14 or something. But
Yep.
anyway, so you have got plot summary duty for the week, so take it away.
Oh goodness. So much happens in these 5 chapters, I feel. Okay, so the Baudelaires go to the Arboretum. They discover that there is this one enormous tree which has bitter apples growing from it. All the detritus there uh, in the Arboretum seems to be from all of their stories, as well as stories not related to them, um, that is all washed up on the shores. Um, then they run into, they go into this hollow under the tree, thanks to the incredibly deadly viper. And Ishmael is there. They confront him about all, his lying. He starts rambling on about this long story that has all these tangential things. And they're like, we just want to know about our parents and, the questions that we actually asked you. He says that you can't understand those unless you know everything else. Whew. And that goes on for quite a while.
It sure does.
Yeah. And then let me think then. Ish and the Baudelaires uh, go back on the sheep-drawn sleigh back
Mhm.
to the tent where they find that the mutiny that had been discussed in the previous chapters has begun. That people have already sort of taken sides. Count Olaf has gotten out of his cage. Um, and Ish just goes ahead and shoots him with a harpoon gun,
He
with
sure
the
does.
final harpoon, which hits Count Olaf in the diving helmet.
Mhm.
Yeah, which releases the
Which is
spores
not a
of.
euphemism. It actually
It
hits
is
him in the
not.
diving helmet.
Yes. Um, yes, which releases the spores of the Meduside mycelium to infect the entire colony. So as they argue about what to do next, whether they should have a pleasant, cordial conversation about what to do next, or whether they should actually just do things, the Baudelaires decide we need to do things. So they go over to the Arboretum, trying to find horseradish, and they eventually discover that the tree itself, the apples that grow from it, are a hybridization that their parents uh, invented, as it's
Mhm.
worded, which has horseradish embedded within it, so that all the
Mm.
apples have this curative property to them to fight off the Medusite mycelium. So, yay, the Baudelaires are saved. They go back to help the islanders, but all these who ship out and leave for the mainland. The Baudelaires are very, very worried. They realize that Ish has been eating apples in order to keep himself protected from the Meduside mycelium. Um, Kit has gone into labor, so they bring her back to the island thanks to the coastal shelf, the waters in the coastal shelf raising. Yeah, so they get back to the island, and they get Count Olaf to help. And apparently, Count Olaf and Kit had a thing, have a thing. I don't know. Um, And so Count Olaf kind of helps, but not really. He eats an apple and then he dies. Um, and yeah, then the Baudelaires are there for the birth of Kit's child, who is named after one of the Baudelaire parents.
Hmm.
Um, I think, did I cover about everything?
Basically, and then they spend a year on the island raising Kit's baby.
Right, yes.
Yeah. Um, yeah,
It's a
you've bas
lot that happens in those 5 chapters.
I suppose it is. It's still over long. There's a lot of sections here where I again feel like handler slash Snicket was getting paid by the word.
Right, yeah. Including that one section where he just interrupts himself, saying that some people put in random things.
Yep. Yes, that's true.
Um,
Um,
all
all
right.
right. Do
I'll
you want
let
me to
you
go
hop
first?
into. Yes, please.
Sure. All right. I think I've only got one note for chapter 9. I have very few notes for these chapters, in part because I'm a little disappointed. I mean, I say a little disappointed, in part because my expectations have already been incredibly low. And so I was pleasantly surprised over the last couple discussions with
Mm,
chapters 1 to 8, because he seemed to be introducing really, really interesting concepts that change your reading of the series. And I wanted to see where he was going to go with that. And then he mostly abandoned those ideas,
yeah, for the most part, yes.
which,
And I would say, yeah, he did, that uh, basically in order to make room for more plot, which he
yeah.
realized that he needed to put in there because nothing had really been happening.
Yeah,
So,
perhaps. Maybe that's why it played out the way it did. But in any case, I mean, he abandons a lot of those ideas, which is basically my fear. It's like, oh no, you're now playing around with really interesting ideas, and you're essentially getting us to recontextualize the entire series as an allegorical depiction of uh, the Jewish people, the diaspora of Jewish people, particularly post Holocaust, and
mm.
then it seems to just go away.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I can see some ways of continuing to read it in that light, but it is,
he
uh,
doesn't It doesn't end with him hammering it home.
yeah,
It just fizzles out where you're like, you can catch a little reference here and there, but any sense of this is just going to become overwhelming of how to read this series, that you have to read it allegorically for the diaspora of Jewish people post Holocaust, then it's
mhm,
like, no, no,
yeah,
he kind of like started going down this pathway, and then it feels like he just kind of turned around and went back to what he was doing before. I don't
yeah,
know about chapter 14 though.
right.
So,
Yeah, I'll admit that I was also, my memory not being that great of the series, and uh, I was a little underwhelmed as well. Where I was just like,
yeah,
oh, I thought that there was more here.
right.
Yeah.
All right. So my only note then for chapter 9 is on page 197, and this is when I was still thinking that he was maybe that this could be read allegorically, and then I just became less and less sure of that as I kept reading. But towards the top of the page, the second sentence down, it says this is where he's listing all the different objects that are in the arboretum. There were objects from every climate, from snowshoes to ceiling fans, and for every occasion, from menorahs to soccer balls. And there were things you could use on certain occasions in certain climates, such as a waterproof fondue set. But the mention of menorahs and all these different possessions, when I was looking at it, then I was at first, I'm just like, oh my goodness. And he does this so often. He just lists things.
Yeah.
I don't know if how many middle grade readers love that. Like, yay, it's a list of random items.
Yeah. Yeah, I
But
know. I kept trying to, read into, is there any meaning behind these? And there isn't among many of them.
Well, the only thing that I could think, but it doesn't really hold up, and and then I thought, well, maybe there's going to be a little bit more ammunition once you get to menorahs. Then okay, yeah, but like, there's not a mention of like gold as far as I can tell. And
Mm,
I was thinking that it's the way the Nazis took everything of value from Jewish people as they put them into concentration camps, including taking their jewelry and, wedding bands and things like that. That's why I'm saying the mention of gold. That I'm like, if you had, let's say, a gold menorah, like whether it's like, like gilded, with like just like gold leaf on it, or something where there's maybe some value that you could get from it, or you know that I'm like, all these random possessions that have all accumulated in one place and they are separated from their owners, that it all ends up there eventually. This idea of stealing everything that German Jews had accumulated.
mhm.
Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, no, I do. And yeah, it is a little disappointing that there isn't more to that as
That's what
far
I'm
as
saying, is I
we can
feel like he
tell.
had an opportunity and he was setting it up, and then I'm like, if you really want to go for it and turn this into a full-on allegory for, Jewish people and the persecution that they've experienced historically, then like follow it through.
Right.
But it just feels like he started doing that and then he just pulled right back from it, and I'm not quite sure why. And that seems like a perfect opportunity to do it.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, the only thing, the thing that I kept uh, coming back to is, this island as a paradise, as a new Eden, um, you know, being a new Eden, as in, um, the eventual heaven, eventually
Hmm.
being reunited with God, and so having, all of these items that are important to people. Obviously, there's, the issue of it being this materialism, but
Yeah.
them all telling stories, and it all, everything winds up there eventually, that people will, presumably make it back there. Like the things that are most important to them end up there. So for some people, then it might be a menorah. For others, then it might be a soccer ball. Um, and,
Yeah.
this idea of like, paradise being different to each person, because there is this, you know, multiple schisms over, what should this paradise be? And so thinking of it that way, where it's like, well, your idea of heaven might be different from my idea of heaven. And so how do we reconcile that and make it, one perfect heaven? Because I feel like he might be, you know, uh, jabbing, punching at us, that, like, see, this is how stupid it is. Because if a paradise would be different for everyone, so how can you have one perfect place?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's also the idea of you would have no purpose, no
Hmm.
attachment to your possessions, which you had a strong attachment to, in your life on earth, but then in heaven, that they just, well, even if they come with you, you don't care about them anymore. But
Right.
that's not really what's happening. They do have a function.
Right.
As we
Yeah.
continue reading, it feels like he introduces all of these interesting ideas and then just doesn't, either doesn't know what he's done, as far as, you just introduced something so fascinating, and it's like,
Yeah.
I did.
Right.
That's kind of how it feels.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
I
um
mean, the other thing, it says later on that, like the children spend their time, as Lemony does, uh, you know, uh, visiting grave sites. Um, and it certainly seems to me like all of these objects are from those who have already passed away, that have already died. And
okay.
so these could, almost be their gravestones, essentially, in a, you know, metaphorical
Well,
way.
metaphorical or literal? I mean, he mentions urns,
Right.
saws and skulls,
Yeah.
cradles and coffins,
Yeah.
which is that's a really nice pairing. Cradles and
Yeah.
coffins. Oh, let's think about both of those things.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I continue to come back to the idea of it's such a good representation of what people criticize postmodern lit for doing, which
Mhm.
is just uh, uh, the way I described it last week is it's essentially spaghetti on the wall. It's just throwing spaghetti against the wall, and it's
Right.
like if it seems significant and if you go, oh, that's a whole mess, but this right here, look at how significant that is. And then the writer gets to go, I'm brilliant. Do you see? And it's like you failed 30 times and you randomly hit something interesting along the way, but that's
Right.
not really a literary accomplishment. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Handler genuinely, I think, deserves far more credit than that. I don't think that it should be that disparaging. But
Mhm.
instances like this, that if you just list like 100 things, then of course people are going to read into some of them if they really try. But I
Yeah.
guess I'm saying, but then what are we supposed to do? Just discount the other 99? And
Yeah.
that's kind of my point here. Anyway, that's all that I really had with chapter 9.
All right. I had a couple extra notes here. Um, Actually, what was my note? Oh, yes, my note on page 197, since we're already there, is the reference to the toward the bottom of the page, the glittering green mask one might wear as part of a dragonfly costume, which was mentioned previously in regards to that party at the Duchess of Winnipeg's.
Mm,
Um, so, yeah, just a nice reference there where, if you're paying attention to that whole uh, external story, then you're like,
right,
oh, right, that makes sense. That it was,
right.
that whole thing of, I think it was that Count Olaf didn't realize that the dragonfly wings on the costume were functional.
Okay.
I think it was something like that had
I don't
happened
remember
before.
this
So,
very well, so I'll take your word for it.
okay. um, yeah. So on page 193, because that's all I had to say about that one. Um, this was, as as you were saying, as we started these, then I was thinking like, yeah, this is still definitely related to, the Jewish story. And so toward the middle of the page, they did not understand VFD even when they had joined the organization themselves, or how the organization, with all of its codes, errands, and volunteers, had failed to defeat the wicked people who seemed to triumph again and again, leaving each safe place in ruins. Um, and yeah, like I feel like if you, again have VFD stand in for the Jewish faith, then that can be, a pretty interesting section. That they did not understand
Absolutely.
Judaism, even when they had joined the church. Even when they, had celebrated their bar mitzvahs or bat mitzvahs, um, or how the organization, with all of its, knowledge, all of its, religious
Hmm.
practices, and all this, had failed to defeat the wicked people. Um, Nazis for one, who seemed to triumph again and again, which the word triumph can certainly, when you're referring to, the Holocaust, brings to mind triumph of the will, at least to
Yep.
me.
Yep.
So,
It
yeah.
does.
So I think that there's something there, and then like leaving each place in ruins, each safe place in ruins. And as we had mentioned, safe places could be referred to as churches or religious places. So,
Yep. No,
yeah.
I agree. When I read that section, then I thought the same thing. I'm like, yeah, this really works. It really is a good way of reading this series allegorically. And
Mhm.
then the more the deeper I got into these chapters, the less and less that seemed to be a thing. And so
Yeah.
it was there, and then it just receded to the
Right.
point where, like, I didn't really see any evidence at all in the last couple chapters.
Yeah. And okay, so my last note for chapter 9 is on page 198. Uh, and I'm curious if can verify this for me. There were items toward the top of the page. There were items that seemed to be part of the Baudelaire story, such as a plastic replica of a clown, clearly referencing the anxious clown restaurant from The Wide Window, and a broken telegraph pole, which of course they sent a telegraph in at the beginning of the hostel hospital. And there were items that seemed part of some other story, such as a carving of a black bird and a gem that shone like an Indian moon. Um, so the carving of a blackbird, I had to look into this, and it seems like it's a reference to the Maltese falcon, um, which is, just like a random reference that, somebody is looking for this item that they, are just really, really struggling to find.
Oh, okay. I guess so. I just figured that that was just related to the town of, like, the village of VFD.
Mm,
Because they
okay.
really
Yeah, yeah.
like, um, what are they, crows, I believe?
Yes.
They
Yeah.
really like crows in that town. And, they've got statues and stuff like that. That's how I read it, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, because the gem that shone like an Indian moon, and some people have said that it is a reference to the Star of India, um, which is, a very interesting item. It's very, I don't know, very precious. It has a star shape on both sides of it, but is it is almost flawless and is unusual in that it has stars on both sides of the stone. Um, so I don't know if it's a reference to that or if it's a reference to a book called The Moonstone um, by Wilkie Collins, who was a 19th century British epistolary novel. So, yeah, sorry.
Novelist?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, Wilkie Collins is great.
Okay,
Like
yeah.
his short fiction, at least. I've read some of his short fiction. It's great.
Yeah, so I believe that that is the better reading of that, because as we had mentioned before, I think that Handler seems to have a certain affinity for epistolary fiction.
Yes. Right. Because,
So
yeah,
it,
we were talking about that last week, where I was saying I don't know how much of it is biography so much as epistolary
yeah,
fiction. So,
yeah. So I think that that's an interesting reference. But yeah, then the carving of a black bird. Then I'm like, because when he says part of some other story, then it makes me think that it is,
oh, yeah.
completely separate, and especially when
Right.
it's referencing the Moonstone. And that's why I'm like, well, I guess the Maltese Falcon makes sense then.
Sure.
Um, but it's such a random reference that I'm like, I don't even know what to make of that. which
Agreed.
which is how we have reacted to many of the references in
That's
the
what I'm
series.
saying. And it's, yeah, I've said it before in relation to modern art, that a lot of people will feel that way about modern art,
Yeah.
that some people will, you know, modern art will get lauded by critics, and then wealthy people will then go along with what critics say and believe all of the apparent significance in it, even if it seems to be completely abstract and unclear what it could possibly represent. And
Right.
then other people who are critical of it will then say it's all a bunch of BS. This is all fraudulent. This is not real art. And
Right.
I'm saying, uh, I don't. Again, I think that Handler deserves far more credit than that. Like, I don't think that he's a charlatan by any means, but I do think that there's instances like this that are in that at least you can make a pretty good argument that if there's no authorial intent and if there's no real interpretive possibility that can be substantiated through the text,
Hmm.
then you go, then it's just a bunch of randomness that you're just throwing it out there. And it's frustrating because you want to feel like with the best literature, the more you think about it, the more significance you find, the deeper
Right.
it becomes, because there was either, well, it should be both, like both authorial intent, the author intended for that thing to be in there and they intentionally put symbolism into the novel or, poem or whatever it happens to be. But then even if there's stuff that the author didn't have in the front of his or her mind, but we then look at it and we go, but it also functions on this level, and they go, yeah. So the more I think about it, the deeper it becomes. But these books is where I get frustrated when he gets into these encyclopedic listings of things, because it's just randomness as far as I can tell, with no significance. But he's got us jumping at shadows. We're constantly
Yes.
thinking that there's got to be some significance, so we spend all of this time that I'm going, but I could be spending time actually talking about literature that does have significance instead of chasing my own tail. Like,
Right.
that's where I get frustrated. But it's like, don't try to get me going on this like wild goose chase if there is no treasure to be found.
Yeah. And sorry, your mic seems to be doing a little bit of an odd buzzing there.
Oh, is it better now?
No.
How about now? Is it better?
Yeah, that's good now.
Okay, I
I
don't
don't
know
know
why
what
I
that
did
was.
that.
Yeah. All right, I guess I'll keep going for chapter 8, or sorry, chapter 10 then.
Absolutely.
All right, so my first note here is on page 218, um, and toward the middle of the page, uh, go from Ish saying, people have been writing stories in this book since the first castaways washed up on the island, and all the stories are connected in one way or another. If you ask one question, it will lead you to another and another and another. It's like peeling an onion. But you can't read every story and answer every question, Klaus said, even if you'd like to. Um, so again, at this point, then I was still thinking more in terms of, the references to Judaism, and the idea of religious texts um, over the time period that the Bible covers. Being written by various people over the time, over that whole time. People have been writing stories in this book since the first castaways, so Adam and Eve, were sent away from the Garden
Sure.
of
Yeah, yeah,
Eden.
yeah. That makes
Um,
sense.
and all the stories are connected in one way or another, which is certainly true of the Bible, because there's so many stories there that don't seem like they're connected, and you can look into it and see how there are these connections that you wouldn't otherwise, uh, think about. And if you ask one question, it will lead you to another and another and another. It's like peeling an onion, which is actually a really good way of, you know, putting a person's journey of faith. Of, you know, you ask one question and you look it up, and then you're like, well, now I have 300 more questions. And so then
Mm-hmm.
you have to look all those up, and you keep getting more answers, but more questions. And, as Klaus puts it, you can't read every story and answer every question, even if you'd like to. And so it's true, and I think that is something that specifically related to uh, Judaism having religious scholars
Yes.
um,
It's the
who
pursuit of wisdom.
yeah, yeah. And this is, again, Handler just pointing out the flaws of it, just being like, see, but you can't know everything, so what's the point?
Yeah, maybe that is how you can read it, that it's supposed to be critical of Ishmael in this case, but it also it echoes back to Dewey, where
Right.
Dewey has got this effort to collect everything from like all of these stories of all of this treachery and to collect it all, but he does
Yeah.
nothing with it.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Where it's just he reads it to know it, but it's unclear how that's useful to any person on Earth at all.
Hmm.
And that seems to be that the pursuit of wisdom, of knowing all of these stories, first the pursuit of knowledge, and then wisdom that can be gleaned from that knowledge.
Right.
It seems to be, I think Handler's at least critical of that aspect of saying if you just keep it to yourself, because Ishmael doesn't share it with the other people on the island. And
Right.
so
Yes.
what good
Yeah.
does it do? Do you know what I mean? That if somebody, let's say, carefully studies, world history and world politics and determines how to accomplish world peace, but they never tell anybody, then it might as well not have happened at all. It's
Right.
entirely
Yeah.
useless. It doesn't matter if you've come up with all of these excellent solutions by your pursuit of knowledge and wisdom if you don't do anything with it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. All right. So moving on to my next note is on page 223. And this is when Sonny asks Lethe, which uh, is also the name of a Greek spirit of forgetfulness and oblivion, with whom the river of Lethe was often identified.
Oh,
Um, yeah, so I'm like, oh, that's a cool reference,
yeah.
because they are talking about how the coconut cordial uh, makes people forget. So,
Right.
um, next on page 224. Get the reference to Electra, Sonny said. And I believe I wasn't able to find much relevance to what Sonny is meaning here, because she says a family shouldn't keep such terrible secrets. Um, and yeah, I don't know, because there are, I think, at least various depictions of Electra. One of the most popular mythological characters in tragedies. She's the main character in two Greek tragedies, Electra by Sophocles and Electra by Euripides. She is also the central figure in plays by, oh my goodness, I'm not going to attempt that name. There's another like five people there.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I can't figure out, what the specific relevance is there.
Um, okay, I want to read this part because it says, so Thursday is alive, Klaus said, just like Kit said. Yes, Ishmael admitted, but at my suggestion, Miranda told her daughter that he died in a storm so she wouldn't worry about the schism that divided her parents. Electra, Sonny said, which meant a family shouldn't keep such terrible secrets. But at least Freud, he used Electra to determine the Electra complex, which is like an
Right.
Oedipal complex, except for a daughter who is jealous for her father, and she sees her mother as like essentially a rival to her father's affection.
Hmm.
And so this whole a family shouldn't keep such terrible secrets, right? And this whole
Right.
thing, oh, I just let her believe that the dad is dead. It's like, what? Was she like really into her dad? I think that's what it's supposed to be. That it's supposed to be a funny little thing for people who know Freudian psychology to be like, "Woo!"
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that
I am familiar with the Electra complex, and I had forgotten about it.
I
But yeah.
think that's what it's supposed to be. That it's supposed to be kind of not exactly a dirty joke, but at least dirty-ish for
Right.
adults to read, and
Yeah.
then go, okay, yeah. You're mentioning Electra and family shouldn't keep secrets, and like, oh, I just let her believe that the dad was dead because, believe me, it was really better if she thought that,
Right.
right? So you go,
Yeah.
okay, gotcha.
At the very least, Ishmael seems to think that that could have been a problem down the road.
Right, right. That's what I'm saying. So he's playing Freudian psychologist, I think, to some degree. Whether he is or not, but Sonny's reading into that, going, somebody's got an Electra complex.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, I don't know what that has to
Okay.
do with the series at all, other than Handler, they just couldn't help himself.
Yeah. All right. My next note is on page 227 when Sunny says Gibbon. Um, and she meant something like, we want to read this history no matter how miserable it is. Um, and this appears to be a reference not to the animal, but to Edward Gibbon. who was an English historian, writer, and member of Parliament. His most important work, The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, was published in 6 volumes. Um, and it is known for the quality and irony of its prose, its use of primary sources, and its polemical criticism of organized religion.
Hmm.
A lot of that sounds familiar.
Yes. Yep. Sounds like something that Snicket, let's give Handler a little bit of credit. At least Snicket would really like.
Yes, yeah. All right, and all right, on page 228, um, uh, sorry, yes, this is the explanation of the Duchess of Winnipeg thing, who gave it to her daughter, who is also the Duchess of Winnipeg, who gave it to her daughter, and so on, and so on, and so on. Eventually, the last Duchess of Winnipeg joined BFD and gave it to Kit Snicket's brother. She gave it to your mother for reasons I still don't understand. She gave it back to him, and he gave it to Kit, and Kit gave it to your father, who gave it to your mother, and when they were married, who gave it to your mother when they were married. So this is presumably I I'm reading into this as being the engagement ring, and it's just like, what in the world does any of this have to do with anything?
Thank you.
This whole Duchess of Winnipeg thing, I'm like, you are so interested in this, and I just have no idea what you're trying to say with it.
I don't know, and like that's what I'm saying is that I've given up a lot of hope or belief
Mhm.
that Snicket is going somewhere with a lot of these things.
Right.
That there's just so many ruses and MacGuffins that he has employed throughout these books that it is effectively like, you know, Lucy and Charlie Brown with the football of like you're asking me to continue to run and to insist you're not going to pull it away, that like no, this time I'm really going to get to my point, this time I'm going to give you a satisfying conclusion to this story, this time I'll tell you why this is related to the Baudelaires. And it's
Mhm.
like, but he never does. He just keeps pulling it away and pulling it away and pulling it away, and then we like just fall on our butts, and it's like, what a waste of our time. This is embarrassing. I can't believe I went chasing after this and I believed you this time, that I just stopped. I stopped a while ago with a lot of
Right.
these. And that I'm saying I'm a pretty patient reader, and I feel like I'm a pretty insightful reader. But if I feel like you're just toying with me, you are going to lose me. And I think that's a fair criticism. To it's
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen like there's a lot of, I really like it when stand-up comedians will toy with an audience, but that's
Mhm.
because they're toying with them for like on the long end, like 5 minutes. Do you know
Right.
what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I think the longest I've seen it is like maybe 8 minutes, where Tig Notaro did that in one of her specials, and it's the best instance I've ever seen of it. But it's one of those things where it's like that's only a few minutes of your time, where it's like you're getting teased, but this is getting teased over 13 books.
Yeah. Um, yeah. And the only thing, I guess the main thing that I'm really puzzled over about all of this is the initial R, which is on the ring, which I don't get it. And I'm wondering if this whole ring is supposed to be the object that was in the sugar bowl. Um, and that they were chasing after all this time because since the fire, then it had been, what does it say? It says Captain Witterson's found the ring in the wreckage of the Baudelaire mansion, only to lose it in a storm at sea, which eventually washed it onto our shores. So I'm wondering if it's supposed to be that the ring was in the sugar bowl, and so it's
Okay,
not two MacGuffins, that it's just one. I
I
still don't get
guess.
the reference to R and this whole Duchess of Winnipeg thing. But one thing that I do have to say about all this is when Sonny asks Nakelot, then it is Tolkien, backwards. And she
Oh.
says, "Why are you telling us about this ring?"
Oh, I like that. That one is okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
I appreciate that one. I would
yeah.
give Handler a high five for that one because that's good. And thank you for pointing that out because I did not catch that.
Yeah, I know. It's like after you read all this stuff about this ring just going from one place to another and all this, that it's just like,
Okay, yeah.
yeah.
See, that actually like he follows through with it and it
Right.
goes somewhere. So that's good. I appreciate that. But don't we get a mention with her in the tree uh, that in the sugar bowl, then there was a little bit of horseradish that was always kept there. Maybe that's not supposed to
Mm,
be the object that everybody was after because that seems strange that they'd all be going after horseradish when you can get it in a lot of different places.
yeah.
But it's at least one thing that was kept in there.
Yes. Yeah, and yeah, I agree. I don't know if that's supposed to be the sugar bowl or if that's just supposed to be, a sugar bowl, because it doesn't make any sense for it to just be horseradish that they've been chasing after.
Right.
You can buy that in
Especially,
the store.
yes. And they even had a horseradish factory. So,
Right. Yeah. So I'm gonna go along with it being this ring, and that the whole sugar bowl thing was actually all this long game to make fun of the Lord of the Rings.
it kind of seems like it.
Yeah.
It does kind of seem like it, which, okay. Like, it's a funny literary illusion
Yeah.
of
I
this whole
don't know that it's
significance.
worthy of, 8 books, but
Right. And I don't even know what exactly the joke is. Is it supposed to be everybody's after this ring? And it's like, yeah, but in Lord of the Rings, there's a reason. It's not
right.
just a random ring. So you control
Yeah.
Middle Earth with it.
Right. Yeah. But anyway, okay, so those are my notes for chapter 10.
Awesome.
Oh yes, and I should also mention that the book of all these, things is chronicled in the book is titled A Series of Unfortunate Events. Bum
Right.
bum bum.
Right. Uh, all right. I have no notes for chapter 10, and I have no notes for chapter 11. So
Oh,
you
all
are
right
just
then.
going to keep right on going. And I should apologize. I don't know how much you can hear it, but they're racing at the track near my house tonight. And so,
Right.
anyway, it just if you're hearing speeding cars, then it's not like somebody's on a high speed chase from the police. It's just it's Central Florida and people love auto racing. So there's a race because we're recording on a Saturday night and that happens around here.
Right. Um, all right. So with chapter 11, uh, I'm okay, on page 251. I'm not quite sure what is going on here. This is, another one of those back and forth uh, discussions, which I really enjoy, by the way. These, things of somebody telling a story and somebody interrupting to be like, "Oh, I know where you're going with this," and it's like, "No, you don't."
Mm.
I enjoy those, but it's toward the bottom of 251. Um, I guess around the middle of the page is where I'll start. No, Olaf said with another frown. There was some argument about his name, actually, as a baby adopted by his orphaned children also bore the same name. Bertrand, Omeros said. No, Olaf said and frowned yet another time. So Bertrand, as we have learned, is the name of the Baudelaire father. And so I'm not sure, you know, it's so confusing to try to read through there and parse what exactly, like, who exactly is who in this whole conversation. But Bertrand Baudelaire, that was adopted by, yeah, I don't, I
This
don't
whole
know.
thing of like because you're right that you get all of these different mentions here. It's um, I'll just very quickly just go through it just so that way people can recall if you're not if you're not following along with an actual book right now that on page 251 Thursday Mrs. Caliban said Olaf frowned no Monday and then blah 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 a man who was involved in a political scandal. Gonzalo, Alonso said. Olaf frowned again. No, he said. Schooner owned by Humphrey, Whedon said. No, Olaf said with another frown. It's that like, oh, is it this person that we've met before? Is it this person we've met before? Is it relating to this event that we've seen depicted in this series? And it's like, no, 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 no. I don't know why you would jump to that conclusion. But so much of this just feels like when our older sister just starts telling us about all the drama going on at her workplace. And it's like, so anyway, Mary said to Susie that because like Jim said this, and it's just like, I don't know any of these people. I don't care about the story because I don't know anybody.
Yes. Yeah. That is fair.
That's how it feels. It's like, so it's none of the stuff that we've been reading about in these books. And it's like, correct. It's stories you've never heard before, characters you've never met before, stuff that just doesn't matter at all to the Baudelaires in the least. And it's like, so why are you telling me any of this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, apparently Mr. Poe was involved with all of this, and that's where it gets really confusing because he had already been promoted to vice president in charge of orphan affairs when the adoption papers were. Anyway, I can't read into it any further because, my eyes are going to get crossed. It's just such a...
I just don't know what the payoff is by following it through. Yeah. That's my point and that's where it feels like the joke is on us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And especially in regards to Mrs. Caliban, who is the mother of Friday, and wife of Thursday. We get mention later on of Olivia Caliban, and the only other Olivia that we have met in the series is Madame Lulu. It was like her real name was Olivia, and so it's like, well, okay, so she's related to all this, but we don't get any kind of explanation. So it's just that's another one of those things where it's just shot in the dark. Like I have no idea.
That's what I'm saying is that there's no payoff. That I don't see any evidence that following it through leads to anywhere of significance.
Yeah. All right. So my last note for chapter 11 is on page 254. And actually, I'll start on the bottom of page 253. This is when Ishmael is describing, where he got the harpoon gun from. I had Omeros keep this weapon handy, Ishmael said, instead of tossing it in the arboretum, because I thought you might escape from that cage, Count Olaf, just as I escaped from the cage you put me in when you set fire to my home. I didn't set that fire, Count Olaf said, his eyes shining bright. I've had enough of your lies, Ishmael said, and stood up from his chair. And this comes around later as well. It's interesting to see Olaf deny his involvement in setting a fire, considering that he has basically proclaimed himself an arsonist before and been proud of any fires that he has set. So having him deny his involvement in it is, just very interesting. I think that, he might have started out as being accused of setting fires and then, started setting them because everybody felt like he was setting them anyway, which is kind of what happened with Baudelaire's.
Yeah.
So
it's an interesting point.
Yeah, I just think that there's some mirroring there that Handler is trying to point out.
But every time he does this, I don't have much patience for it. I really don't, because to somehow this, moral equivalency between the two of them, every time he tries to introduce that, it doesn't make sense.
Right.
They are not the same as Olaf, not by any means. Even when they set a fire, that doesn't make them anything like Olaf.
Yeah. So those were my notes for chapter 11.
Okay. All right, so that brings us to chapter 12. I do have notes for chapter 12. Cool. So on page 262, moving into page 263, then it says, let me see. I guess I'll go from the bottom of 262. The tent was filled with ululation, a word here which means the sound of panicking islanders. Dead, Madame Nordhoff shrieked. Nobody said the fungus was deadly. I thought we were merely being threatened with forbidden food. And, you know, this seems to be some kind of reference to Eve of going, well, I didn't know that biting the apple would kill me, right?
Right.
And,
yeah.
you know, the serpent certainly gets her to doubt this, right? That, you know, God doesn't want you to eat it because he wants to keep that knowledge of good and evil to himself. And,
Right.
you know, but for if you eat of this, then you will surely die. And then she eats of it, and she doesn't surely die, but she does, right?
Yes.
That it's one of these things of like, if you eat this, you'll die. And it's like, well, she would have lived eternally in that form if it were not for eating of the apple. But then it doesn't mean that you die immediately. It just means that you now will pass away from this earth, that your life on earth is finite.
Yeah.
And so it just seems to be some kind of reference to Eve, but I don't know much beyond that, right?
Yeah.
I just, you know, I didn't know that it was deadly. I thought we were merely being threatened with forbidden food.
Yeah.
Okay.
Forbidden food obviously seems to, relate to that.
Yeah.
When we've got all this other, discussion of, the apple and the serpent and all that.
Right. And then on page 264, then this is Sunny who's speaking here, where I guess I'll read from the top of 264. We can decide what the root of the problem is and come up with a solution at our leisure. That does sound reasonable, Calypso admitted. Trahison des clercs, Sunny cried, which meant you're forgetting about the quick-acting poison in the fungus. So, I mean, it's a little, like, I'm trying to see of, like, why she says this and what the significance is. But basically, trahison des clercs is a French term, which just means betrayal of clerics. So clerics as in religious people, betrayal of religious people. But I'm not sure if it's supposed to, like, how this is being used, if it's betrayal by religious people, by clerics, or of clerics.
Yeah, so when I had searched it up in order to see if I can get any more clarity into it, then I found that it is the title of a book by Julien Benda, who is a French philosopher and novelist. He remains famous for his short book, La Trahison des Clercs. I do not have the same accent that you do, obviously.
And even mine's not great, to be honest. Like it's pretty good for an Anglophone, but it's pretty terrible compared to Francophones.
Okay. He was nominated 4 times, and I don't really know. Sorry, I've now lost the link here.
If it's betrayal of the clerics, then it should say trahison par les clercs. But it says trahison des clercs, which means betrayal of clerics. So it seems to be that, like, the clerics or religious people have been betrayed.
Yeah, it's okay. So this is the description of the book. It is Julien Benda's classic study of 1920s Europe. The treason of the intellectuals, as this translation says, is a phrase that evokes much, but is inherently ambiguous. The book bearing this title is well known, but little understood. So.
Okay, so clerics just being intellectuals then. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. All I can think is that, that handler wanted to make a reference to this this
random.
Yeah. He used cleric in the medieval sense, i.e. to mean scribe, someone we would now call the intelligentsia. Academics and journalists, pundits, moralists, and pontificators of all varieties are in this sense clerics. The treason in question was the betrayal by the clerks of their vocation as intellectuals. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't have any extra, information about
I
that,
guess
and
it's just
so
because Ishmael's trying to convince everybody to drink the cordial instead of actually solving the problem. That he's
right. And I
essentially
guess
just
that Sunny
he
is
knows better. He knows how to heal people of this because the medusoid mycelium has been released. He's eating apples, so he's keeping himself safe, but he's insisting like, oh, don't listen to them. They don't know what they're talking about, and just drink your coconut cordial and get drunk and you know basically
right.
die in peace instead of helping.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
guess that's what it is. It's that he's an intellectual who's betraying them because he does have knowledge, but he's not sharing it with them.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then on page 280 to 281, this is Ink, the snake, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
that the snake's name, Ink?
Yes, that's its nickname, either Ink or Inky.
Okay. So the bottom of 280, then this is like where the Baudelaires, they're almost dead from the medusoid mycelium. I don't know why they die, like why they're next to death so much more quickly than everybody else on the island.
I suppose because they are younger?
What about Fiona?
I don't know.
Yeah, but whatever. The
Yeah.
snake slithered through the gap in the roots of the tree, and whatever the serpent was thinking, it was quite clear from the sibilant sound that came hissing through the reptile's clenched teeth that the incredibly deadly viper was offering the Baudelaire orphans an apple. Um, all right, whatever you want to make of this is fine. I personally really hate this, but he's trying to upend, like he's completely rewriting the story from the first few books of Genesis. And here it's basically he's saying Satan is actually the good guy, God's actually the bad guy. And this whole switcheroo is to me like I don't really know what the purpose is here.
Hmm.
It's other than just, you see how clever it is? I reversed it. I'm going, yes, you reversed it. That's not clever. That's just a reversal.
Yeah, I guess the way that it is intentionally, I think, ambiguous in this way, where because I feel like it can be read as this temptation um, uh, to basically, if the Baudelaires had died there, then they would have rejoined, like they would have gone to heaven and been, rejoined with God.
But they won't because I'll get to this in the next chapter, but it's a Jewish understanding of the afterlife, which is we don't know what it is. So there's no guarantee of
Right.
anything.
Yeah.
And it's a description, it's basically a Sheol understanding, right? That it's a we don't know.
Right.
Nobody's been there. We can't say for sure what it is, if anything. So that doesn't. It's not a Christian understanding of the afterlife.
Right. Yeah.
And so
And I
anyway,
figured that that was why it was, I'm like, I feel like it might be that, but I don't think that that's how
but
Judaism
he's just, I
sees
don't
it. So,
understand why he's reversing this because so you've got this incredibly deadly viper. Think about this
mhm.
incredibly deadly viper, but it's not. It's actually super gentle and it's so loving. And so, oh, Satan has been misportrayed all along. He's incredibly deadly. But no, 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 no. He's your best friend. Cuddle up to him. Whatever he says, do it. He's going to bring you an apple. God says don't eat the apple, but then he's going to say, no, 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 this will save you. And it literally will save you. Ooh, God doesn't want you to eat the apple because he's selfish and Satan was right all along, but God wrote the Bible and therefore, we get this like he's reversing the first few books of Genesis, but like I
Mhm.
say, I don't understand um what the purpose is aside from just I'm reversing the good evil. it now becomes evil is good, and you know, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering if he is depicting it this way because he seems to have he seems to be a secular humanist in many ways, and so he appreciates the fact that that people are living in this world, that they are um, I don't know, that it's because it's the knowledge of good and evil, and so knowledge is something that is cherished, and so he's like, well, if Judaism is so intent on you know pursuing knowledge, then that's what was being withheld by God, and that's what the serpent, Satan, essentially was offering.
But
I don't know.
no, I know what you're saying, but I'm saying that even within Judaism, you shouldn't know evil.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm going to have knowledge of it. Sure, to have knowledge of good, that's important, but not to have knowledge of evil. Not to
Right.
say, let's explore every variety of evil imaginable because there's knowledge of evil. Let's
Hmm.
understand all of like that. They don't believe that at all. That's nonsense. Um, and this whole idea of like, but it's God who offers it. Like
Right.
God imbued the apple with knowledge of good and evil. He didn't have to put that tree in there.
Right. Yeah.
He did it like he's the one who actually put it. Satan didn't give anything. He tempted them to be disobedient. And within Judaism, then obedience is highly valued, right? That
Yeah.
sure, wisdom and knowledge is valued, but obedience to actually do what God is instructing you to do is far more important, right?
Hmm.
That you don't say, well, I'm going to be disobedient, but God's going to be cool with it because I'm going to gain some knowledge along the way. That Handler seems to be um, essentially, to use the term that we get throughout this book, rocking the boat for an unclear purpose, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's I don't get it. It's I would not publish a book and then write a book in Arabic and try to get it disseminated throughout the Muslim world that waits until book 13 to say, Muhammad is not actually the real prophet. It's
Right.
actually Satan is really the hero and Muhammad has tricked you, right?
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't do that because I don't really see what the purpose is. Cuz
Hmm.
I don't believe that. And I don't think that Handler believes this either. I don't think he believes that Satan is actually the hero in Genesis. I don't think
Yeah.
he believes that eating the apple is actually a good thing. So I don't know why he's flipping the story. And I understand that some people could look at this and say, like, ooh, you're getting all upset because of this. And I'm like, I'm not upset because it's a heretical description of what happened in the first few books of Genesis. It's not the heresy, so to speak. It's the fact that he has encoded heretical messages into a text that appears to be secular, but it's actually antagonistic to a Christian and Judaic worldview. And I'm going,
Hmm.
I don't like that. I've said it before that I don't like the fact that he is essentially whispering to children without their parents listening to say, God's not real. He's actually the bad guy, and you should listen to Satan. Like, that's essentially what he's doing in this passage. I don't know how else to interpret that because he's reversing the story and depicting it as though the serpent is actually heroic and God is actually nefarious.
Hmm.
And like you could tell that story, but just make it clear. Just title it, like the Satanist like children's storybook. Like, do you
Right.
know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
we're gonna like twist all of your favorite biblical stories and flip them on their head, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I do agree that it's certainly an unexpected, you know, way of depicting this story. It basically, this leads into my two notes that I have for this chapter. Um, uh, Mainly the first one on page 278, when Sonny says Gentry 5, um, which appears to be Genesis chapter 3, verse 5, which reads, "For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil."
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, what else that is, because he could have, picked Genesis 3, verse 4, which is, "You will not certainly die," the serpent said to the woman. But that, I think, would have been a more interesting, you know, verse to quote there, having the serpent say, "You will certainly not die," and then having this serpent appear and, guarantee that the children will not die. But that he doesn't do that. That he just says, he just has this reference to what the apple
Because
will do.
I don't think that he has any plan. That's what I'm
Mhm.
saying.
Right.
It's that he's just randomly playing with a whole bunch of stuff, and I don't see any deeper thought beyond. Wouldn't it be interesting if I reverse the story from Genesis? And I'm
Right.
like, not really. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, okay, why don't we do like a retelling where Abraham like goes to murder Isaac, but then Isaac gets up and he guts his dad, and then he's like, "I'm the patriarch now." Like, sure, we could retell all these stories, but to what effect? Why?
Yeah.
I don't get what he's doing, and it's frustrating because I don't like it when I feel like I say, that there's no payoff, that there's no authorial intent. It's I've said it before that I really like The Last Temptation of Christ, which is an incredibly heretical film, right? And I know
Yeah.
that it's a book. I have not read the book, but it's incredibly heretical, and
Mhm.
I really like that film. I think that like it was boycotted like crazy across the United States, and I'm sure Europe as well, by Christians who were appalled by it. But I'm saying I'm no prude. I don't
Right.
have any issue with somebody putting forth a heretical reading of scripture. But I'm going, but why? Why are you doing this? It's far more interesting to me to say, let's take the like scripture as it is and then do something interesting in the way you twist it, but it doesn't get twisted in any interesting way. There's no
Right.
insight into scripture here. That's, I think,
Yeah.
what bothers me. It's
Yes. Yeah.
simplistic. It's just
Yeah.
like you barely even know the story.
Right. Yeah. And hmm, it's hmm, I'm yeah,
What do you like? Because you don't seem to have an issue with it.
I guess, well, right now that I'm trying to figure out a more interesting way of doing this, which I feel like would be to have the incredibly deadly viper, basically be the one who had brought the Medusoid mycelium to the island, and that would have been more interesting. I think that
I
that would
just
have
think
fallen more in line, you
I
know,
this is what I said
with that. But
though. I don't know how much of it was recorded because I know that we talked after the podcast as well. But at the very beginning of this book, then I went, I am uneasy about Handler introducing biblical themes because there is no evidence that he has any insight into the Bible whatsoever.
right,
The actual text itself, not to mention theology, that
yeah,
there's no indication that he knows anything about this. So to me, if you don't know anything about it, then it's probably best just not to start talking about it.
mhm,
Otherwise, like you're not only going to, it's a waste of time He
Right.
introduces all of these biblical themes, but I don't understand to what effect.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that that's fair. The last comment, and I mean, I'm honestly not trying to, defend him at all. But
No,
the
I
last,
I'm grateful for anything that can justify this.
right. Um, uh, but yeah, the last thing that I have to say on it is it certainly subverts expectations.
Fine. Yeah. No, I mean
I
like
know
that's
that you're not fond of that, but
no,
uh, yeah.
because it's idiotic.
Mhm.
That subverting expectations doesn't mean good.
Right. Yeah.
Just because you do the like you set something up and then you don't offer a payoff doesn't mean brilliant piece of art. It
Yeah.
just means that it was a bait and switch,
Yeah.
that you duped people, that you tricked them in some way, that I've said it before, that subverting expectations is like when it's effectively when a twist ending fails.
Mhm.
Then people don't say like, wow, what, like if it works, they say, wow, what a twist ending. That was great. I didn't see that coming at all, and it was so amazing, and that totally changes the way I view the film. When it doesn't work, then people go, that was stupid, right?
Right.
I can't believe it ended like that. And then people, and then you could then say, it subverted your expectations, and it's like, yeah, I expected it to be good, and it turned out to be
Right.
bad.
Yeah.
That it's just, I my point though is just a reversal is not anything interesting. That I've said it before about Christopher Nolan's film Memento. That
Mhm.
before I rewatched it, because I watched it not that long after it came out. I think it came out in 2001, and I watched it probably in 2002, 2003, and then I rewatched it a couple years ago. But I said before I rewatched it, I'm like, I can't remember whether, because the story is told backwards,
Mhm.
whether that actually is doing anything other than just what if I tell a story backwards instead of
Right.
forwards? And it's just, well, just doing it in reverse doesn't actually do anything interesting. You just told a regular story that you did in reverse. But then when I rewatched it, it's because of the fact that the protagonist has got, long-term or even short-term memory loss, that he basically can't form any memories beyond a few seconds.
Mhm.
That's the twist in the story that actually makes telling it backwards really interesting. But
Right.
if Nolan didn't have that element to the film, it would not be interesting.
Yes.
It would
Yeah, I
just be
agree.
backwards. That's what I'm saying about this. Is it's not interesting, it's just backwards.
Right.
That you just
Yeah.
made the villain the hero and the hero the villain, but why? What does
Yeah.
that do? How does that retelling offer any insight? And I just don't get insight here, other than I think he just wants to aggravate Christians and to get kids to like to embed this in here, where he's not saying I'm talking about the Bible and what you learned in Sunday school is wrong.
Mhm.
That's where it troubles me, that
Right.
he's introducing doubt into for many um, for millions of Christians, because this thing has sold however many millions of copies, then
Mhm.
certainly millions of those, I'm sure, have at least to varying degrees of, um, I don't know, like
Devotion.
devotion, yeah, are Christian families, to then introduce doubt into the foundation of God is good and Satan is evil, to
Mhm.
introduce doubt into that without saying this is going to introduce doubt, that I'm actually advocating for Satanism instead of Christianity.
Right.
I'm going, that is kind of a messed up thing to do when you're when you're hiding it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, uh the- it that's definitely fair and understandable uh yeah, reaction to it. And I didn't yeah, I mean I knew that there was, this little bit of a turn, but I felt like there was more to it. Um, you know, from like what I had remembered and yeah, reading it, then I was just like, oh, it's just it's yeah, and there's not really much purpose behind it.
Not that I can see. If somebody can come up with some purpose, like, feel free to comment below.
Yes,
But it better be a
absolutely.
real purpose. Don't
Right.
just say like something really shallow. I want like actual justification for this,
Right.
because to basically say to introduce Satan as being actually the hero of humanity and God being the enemy of humanity, that like the greater what there's a legal description of this, right? But basically the more um, the greater the accusation requires like more evidence,
Right.
right?
Yes.
That if you're going to
Yeah.
say like, I'm going to accuse you of maybe at one time possibly perhaps speeding 1 mile per hour more than the speed limit, then somebody would be like, okay, you probably don't need a lot of evidence to prove that because it's not much of an accusation. But to
Right.
say like, I believe that you secretly have murdered like 300 people, then it's like, that's a big accusation. You're going to have a ton of evidence for that. So I'm saying
Right.
this is the biggest accusation of all. It's that the foundational principles of like Judeo-Christianity and even within the Islamic world, that the three most prominent religions in the world, or three of the most prominent religions in the entire world, are all founded on a lie.
Right.
That I'm going,
Yeah.
then you better be doing something pretty interesting there, other than just saying, just cause it's funny, it's a reversal.
Right. Yeah. Uh, all right. Well, I only have one more note here, and it is relevant. It is Sunny on page 279 saying, two more chap, which clearly means that we have two chapters left.
All right.
Clearly indicating, of course, we're not going to die here. There's still more story in here.
Right. Right. That's good.
Yes. So moving on to chapter 13. Um, did you want to go first, or shall I?
Sure, I've just got one note, and it's still on to some degree on the same topic.
Mhm.
And I had mentioned this before. It's on page 305. And well, I guess it's really the bottom of 304 into 305, where this is the question mark thing that moves
Mhm.
underwater, where towards the bottom of 304 in the middle of that paragraph, it says, I gathered all the books in reach that I enjoyed, tossing the boring ones into the sea, but everyone else wanted to take their chances with the great unknown. I begged the others to climb aboard as the question mark approached, but only ink managed to reach me. The others, her voice trailed off, and for a moment Kit did nothing but wheeze. In an instant they were gone, either swallowed up or rescued by that mysterious thing. You don't know what happened to them? Klaus asked. Kit shook her head. All I heard, she said, was one of the quagmires calling Violet's name. Um, so essentially, I'm saying that this is a Jewish belief of the afterlife, which is Sheol, where it's essentially, as far as I understand it, but I'm not Jewish, and so, but I've got a decent, at least a working understanding of Judaism, and
Mhm.
it's their conception of the afterlife is that it's unknowable. So
Right.
we don't know whether you spend eternity with God or whether you don't, right?
Mhm.
That there's a sense that there is something afterwards, but what is it and what does that mean, and the permanence of that, and all of that is unclear. And
Right.
that's is essentially what this great question mark thing is it's them going into the great unknown, going into Sheol, basically choosing to give up their life for a mystery.
Right. Yeah.
And so it continues to come back to a to some degree a Jewish worldview. Um, but again, Jewish people would certainly take exception to that depiction of the serpent, the apple, that actually offering salvation to the Baudelaires, that saves them,
Mhm.
and that yeah, refusing that would doom them.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know what to say beyond that, but just that's what it is. It's a Jewish conception of the afterlife.
Right. Yeah. No, that is yeah, that is very, very interesting. And yeah, thank you for the clarification there. Um, all right. So my notes here. On page 295, I'm not sure what to make of this passage where, toward the bottom of the page, Violet says, the entire colony could be poisoned, and even if you make it to shore, the fungus could spread to anyone you meet. You're not keeping anyone safe. You're endangering the whole world just to keep a few of your secrets. That's not parenting. That's horrid and wrong. So my brief, thoughts on this is, for one thing, yeah, they could be dooming the entire world, which would be horrible. But if we are, continuing along the trend before of Ishmael being, being a god figure to the island, then him being a terrible parent, that he is, endangering the whole world just to keep a few of your secrets. The idea of keeping or kicking Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Evil and even giving them the sorry, yes. Sorry, yes. And, keeping the tree with the knowledge of good and evil there, leaving it to their own, personal choice as to whether or not they take of it, but knowing that, if they do, then they are doomed. Then it certainly seems like that's what's happening here as well, where, it's, saying that you're not keeping anyone safe. You're presenting this, opportunity for failure. And, you're like endangering the whole world just to keep a few of your secrets, those secrets of the knowledge of good and evil. And saying that that's not parenting, that's horrid and wrong. So,
as far as I can tell, Handler has got some stuff to work out.
yes, yeah.
I don't know how, because he's definitely setting up Ishmael as essentially God, and then screaming at him, "You're a terrible dad."
Right.
You're a bad parent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like, maybe you shouldn't have attacked Olaf, this man who's been established as being fully evil, because he will essentially unleash hell upon, everyone around the world.
So what are you saying here? That that it's essentially the accusation that because God is at war with Satan, that endangers all of us?
Yeah, I feel like there could be that reading.
I mean, if so, then it's just a complete misunderstanding of the scriptural description of how this all happened.
Right.
That. Yeah. Like, who shot first?
Right. Yeah.
What is it, Greedo or Han?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And that, like, Handler's just getting it wrong. He's getting it backwards, like George Lucas ended up getting backwards afterwards. And it's just like, how well that's gone.
Right. Yep. Okay. So moving on to my next note on page 298. Then Sunny says Kontiki, and she meant something along the lines of there's no way they'll survive the journey, but the Baudelaire was wrong. And this is a reference to the Kontiki expedition, in which a group of sailors, essentially, they recreated a potential journey by raft to reach Polynesia from, I believe, from the, it says across the South Seas, across the Pacific in a raft. And it is a raft that is made entirely of objects that would have been found in ancient times.
Okay.
So just, looking into how exactly did people settle on Hawaii? Where did they come from? And recreating that journey to prove that it is possible that they just sailed there.
Right.
So, yeah, it's and that expedition was successful. So,
Right. Yeah, I
despite all
remember.
the odds.
Yes. Yes, I
Yeah.
remember hearing about this.
Yeah. So yeah, that's just a fun reference. I appreciate the fun references.
Yeah, I'm
Wow.
sorry. I'm not trying to ruin anybody's enjoyment of the books.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's just, it helps there to be uh I don't know, I guess a little bit of extra appreciation for the moments that do work.
Right.
Um, all right, and so on page 313, um, then this is when, Olaf is, Violet knelt on the sand and grabbed the villain's shoulders with both hands. We have to go on, she said. Do one good thing in your life, Olaf. I've done lots of good things in my life, he snarled. I once took in 3 orphans, and I've been considered for several prestigious theatrical awards. Klaus knelt down beside his sister and stared into the villain's shiny eyes. You're the one who made us orphans in the first place, he said, uttering out loud for the first time a secret all 3 Baudelaires had kept in their hearts for almost as long as they could remember. Olaf closed his eyes for a moment, grimacing in pain, and then stared slowly at each of the 3 children in turn. Is that what you think? He said finally. We know it, Sonny said. You don't know anything, Count Olaf said. You 3 children are the same as when I first laid eyes on you. You think you can triumph in this world with nothing more than a keen mind, a pile of books, and the occasional gourmet meal. He poured one last gulp of cordial into his poisoned mouth before throwing the seashell into the sand. You're just like your parents, he said, and from the shore the children heard Kit Snicket moan. So this is a pretty big thing of Olaf essentially just saying, like, he doesn't say it directly, but he is certainly implying that he didn't set the fire that burned down the Baudelaire mansion and killed the Baudelaire parents. Um, that he took them in um, through the generosity of his own heart, which certainly was partly motivated by the enormous fortune that they left behind. Um, but then he almost seems to be saying that, like when he says, "You 3 children are the same as when I first laid eyes on you," he expected them to grow and perhaps was trying to give them an opportunity to grow out of their naivete, um, their youthful naivete, into a greater understanding that it's not as simple as the black and white of good and evil.
I guess. I I don't like there's Olaf is just the an incredibly inconsistent character where
Mm,
he's two-dimensional and then every time Handler tries to make him three-dimensional it doesn't work because then he just goes right back to being a cartoonish villain
mm,
that and this whole thing is you can't retroactively change what's happened in the previous 12 books because you're trying to give Olaf some kind of moment or something, which he doesn't really give him a moment anyway. But like whatever Olaf thought, like I mean, you know, like that he seems disappointed that they haven't matured. I think it's that he's disappointed that they haven't become, treacherous, that they haven't become villainous like him
right.
and that because there's this insistence throughout these chapters in particular from Ishmael and this whole discussion of the island that the world is full of treachery and villainy and if you just shield yourself enough then you can avoid it and it's such a dumbass worldview. It's so ridiculous and um, so Olaf saying this, that he thought that they would, I think, become like him. He wasn't doing it to be generous. He was doing it to be selfish. And it's that he's surprised that they didn't become villainous the way he did. And he's angry about that. He's angry that he's evil and they're not becoming like him. And that's disappointing to him, it seems. That's my reading of it.
All right.
Yeah.
And any thoughts on the fact that he did not burn down the Baudelaire mansion, or seemingly did not?
I don't believe anything he says.
Hmm.
Just like with everything in these books, it's Lucy and the football.
Right.
It's all these fake outs and fake outs and fake outs. It's constantly like Olaf has lied about like everything. He lies about like seemingly everything all the time.
But he's always embraced his, villainous appearance. And for him to, deny that, to say that, that he didn't set that fire, and that, he, like, oh, you think that I caused that fire? Like, you don't know anything.
He doesn't say that though, Tyler. It doesn't say. He says they're like, whatever, that you burned down our house. And then he says, "Is that what you think? We know it," Sonny said. "You don't know anything." This is like if Snicket was writing, "You don't know anything" is a great phrase that actually signifies nothing. That it's not affirming or denying whether he set the fire. Right?
Right.
Yeah. Is that what you think is another meaningless phrase, which in this case means I'm not confirming or denying the fact that I set the fire. That he doesn't confirm or deny it. So it's not clear that he did or didn't. It's just saying, to me, it could be that he did, but he's saying, you guys don't know why I did. You don't know how I did. You don't know what the context is. To say it'd be the same thing as saying, like, they set the fire at Caligari Carnival, which they didn't. They threw a match, but the thing was already on fire and it would have made no difference. That they set the fire at Hotel Denouement. It's like sort of they gave the idea, but they didn't mean it. That it'd be the same thing, that if somebody said, you guys burned down Hotel Denouement, you don't know anything. Right? That'd be the response. So it's not confirming or denying.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. It is intentionally ambiguous. Yeah, there are numerous readings of it where, many people do think that it was Olaf and that this is just his way of, not giving them the satisfaction of knowing that it was him. That, he kind of leaves them, his last laugh of like, haha, I'm not even going to confirm that was me. But there are others who say that perhaps it was, Esme who started the fire, since she desperately wanted the sugar bowl.
Right. But I guess my point is, what difference does it make?
Right.
That there's no payoff to anything. And I guess Handler would say, I told you all along that it's, you're not going to like this. At least Snicket has been saying it all along.
Right.
Oh, don't read this, and it just ends horribly, and blah, 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 blah. That it's like, is that just lampshading for the fact that it's like, there's not really a good conclusion to this? Like, not because it ends in tragedy, but because it's not satisfying in any way.
Right. Yeah.
Again, I have not read chapter 14 yet, so maybe there's more to it. But Olaf does, I mean, it's as overt, I think, as can be that he does die. They talk about his grave and all of this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Like, there's just so much stuff that gets introduced and then doesn't get settled. And that you can make of that what you will. It feels like a giant tease with no payoff.
Right. Yep. Yeah, no, that is fair. All right, well, I have two more notes, and I promise they will be quick. The first is on page 317, toward the bottom of the page, when Kit recites a poem, and she says, "The night has 1,000 eyes," Kit said hoarsely, and lifted her head to face the villain. Um, I'll just read the actual poem, which is by Francis Bourdillon. Um, the night has 1,000 eyes and the day but one, yet the light of the bright world dies with the dying sun. The mind has 1,000 eyes and the heart but one, yet the light of a whole life dies when love is done. Um, so that's interesting in and of itself, but on page 318, then we get Olaf reciting a different poem, which I cannot read on the podcast word for word. But I will, put a few alternate words in here or so. And this poem is "This Be the Verse" by Philip Larkin. Uh, they F you up, your mom and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and add some extra just for you. But they were effed up in their turn by fools in old style hats and coats who half the time were soppy stern and half at one another's throats. Man, man hands on misery to man, it deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can and don't have any kids yourself. Um, So my reading of this essentially is that Olaf didn't want to have kids, and that's what split up, Kit and Olaf. I think that there's definitely more there about Olaf's parentage and and his youth growing up that
Yeah.
way, but yeah, it's a lot that's said in just those two poems about the way that their relationship was and how it ended and all, and their continued feelings on it. But yeah, it's just again like this greater story that is only being hinted at in these books.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's it. It's that, oh, there's this potentially really interesting thing that's going on, but
Mhm.
I'm just going to show you the edge of it and not tell you that. And if you like that, then you must be loving this whole section, right?
Right. Yeah.
If you feel like my attitude is more, if that's the interesting, tell the interesting story. Tell the story
Mm.
that should be told.
Right.
Don't tell us the secondary story then.
Hmm.
I don't know. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it goes back to, when he had mentioned before, hiding messages uh, in a in an irrelevant text, and this is sort of, potentially what he's doing here, where he's trying to
Yeah.
tell these other stories through the lens of the Baudelaires.
Right. But it does support what I was saying before, that Olaf seems disappointed in the fact that the kids don't become villainous the way he is. And that
Mm.
Larkin poem is essentially saying that your parents are messed up and that they're going to pass on a lot of their own um, problems and worldviews that are not really okay, and their shortcomings and all of this stuff. They're going to pass that on to you, and just you're going to replicate all of their mistakes. And then he has accepted this, but the Baudelaires don't do this. They don't become like him. They don't become like these awful guardians that they've had along the way. That they don't take on their flaws, and he seems to resent that
Right. Yeah.
because he did, and it's his, like, because it forces him, I think, to confront the fact that he actually has autonomy, he has agency, and that he didn't have to become evil. He didn't, even if he had evil parents who were really bad, or evil guardians, because his parents died in a fire, and et cetera, that
Mhm.
he didn't have to turn out the way he did, but he did, and that is kind of on him,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
That he seems to be upset by that with the Baudelaires, that's why he's constantly trying to turn them to a life of villainy. And when he fails, and he hates them all the more, right?
Mm.
He wants them
Yeah.
to be, broken like he is. And when they're not, then it's upsetting to him, because then it forces him to confront the fact that it's like, this is kind of your fault, Olaf.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, those were my only notes for the text. But then we do have I'm going to skip over the final photo for a moment here to look at the author and illustrator descriptions here. And it is interesting that they are reversed this time around, and that we see the face of the man in the actual photo, but it seems to be that is intended to be Brett Hellquist, and that Lemony Snicket is just depicted in cartoon form.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I looked at that and I went, oh, we actually get to see him. And then I went, wait, it's all flipped. And then I went, oh, okay. So it's this whole joke that if kids are not paying close attention, then they'll go, oh, finally, I get to see what Lemony Snicket looks like. And like some of them will believe that. And then others will go, oh, I still don't. Why'd you turn it around? You did it the other way around. And Lemony Snicket's down at the bottom when he was on the top. And I still don't really get to see what he looked like.
All right. And did you have any comments on the final photo for this chapter?
I'm puzzled over it. I'm not sure. I think that's supposed to be Snicket, who in his research is him going or either arriving or leaving the island.
Yeah, I believe that is the correct reading of it, or the intended reading of it. And if you flip back to page 236, there is the mention toward the top of the page where Snicket writes, the moral of the story, this is when he's talking about the little engine that could, the moral of the story is that if you tell yourself you can do something, then you can actually do it. A moral easily disproved if you tell yourself that you can eat 9 pints of ice cream in a single sitting, or that you can shipwreck yourself on a distant island simply by setting off in a rented canoe with holes sawed in it.
That's funny.
Yeah. So that was his intended his intention there. It was to set off and shipwreck himself.
Right.
It did not work.
Right. And speaking of which, since you just reminded me about the little engine that could, I did say at the beginning, he's my second favorite train, but I never said. Yeah, Thomas the Tank Engine. Come on, right?
Yes, of course. Yeah. Yeah, very, very true. The old school one, not
Shining
not the
Time
one.
Station. With who they had different folks on there. I know it was George Carlin, and wasn't it like Ringo Starr for a while?
I think you're right.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Oh man, yeah, I loved that show as a kid because, as I've mentioned before, I love trains. So
right. Yeah, I know you loved that show. But,
yeah. All right. Well, I guess that will wrap it up for book the 13th.
Yeah, because I think I've got a few other thoughts, but I want to read chapter 14 because it is still in the same actual book. So I feel like before I give any final thoughts on book 13 or the series, then I ought to read chapter 14. So I'll save all of that for the next podcast.
Yeah, sounds good, since we've been talking for a while anyway.
Yeah. All right, folks, we'll be sure to read the 13 pages in chapter 14 for next week, and then look out for the next video that we're going to have as a discussion of that, but also a final wrap-up of the series before we then start getting into film and television adaptations of the book series. All right, well, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Ignore the tattoo! A phrase here which means like, comment, subscribe, and share this podcast across the web. That may seem like a strange definition, but in this context, it is entirely accurate.